Great. Thanks so much, Therese. I appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. I know it's getting hot out there. I've just arrived in South Carolina, actually, so this is something I'll have to get used to. Yeah, so tonight we're celebrating this wonderful acquisition by FAAAC, and we've put together a little gallery presentation. I should say it's a small gallery, but it is a big theme surrounding the work of Oliver Lee Jackson. The theme centers on the intersection of modern art and music throughout the 20th century and a bit beyond. I thought I would present some historical context around this theme. I'm not going to talk about every work in the show. I'll let you have a look for yourself. It is on the second floor here in Gallery 6 out to the left. It's the low-light gallery, I should say, so if the lights are off, when you walk in, they will go on. So, excitement for Kandinsky. So in 1910, the Russian painter Vasily Kandinsky began a series of abstract canvases, which he called compositions. These are an important source for our discussion and for the gallery, not only as some of the first works of modern abstract art, but also because of their clear reference to music. Obviously, composition being a term we most often associate with a musical piece. So with this gesture, by referring to his work as a composition, Kandinsky drew attention to the fact that music is, in fact, the only inherently abstract form of art. As an important innovator of non-representational art, he was very much trying to synthesize the relationship between visual art and music in abstract formal terms. In his famous treatise of 1910 on the spiritual in art, Kandinsky compares the aims of the modernist composer to that of the visual artist. So he's very conscious of this. He references Debussy and Schoenberg by name, saying that they, quote, present spiritual impressions, which they often derive from nature, and which they then refine into spiritual visions by purely musical means. Kandinsky, as a painter, was seeking an art of transcendence. He recognized the capacity of music to fulfill that mission, and it was music that, in the hands of Schoenberg, transcended the realm of auditory pleasure into an experience that was purely soul-inspiring. Bridget Riley, fast forward about 5 or 6 decades, a British artist, is also looking to modernist composers for inspiration. In the 1960s, as a young painter, she's inspired by the ideas of Stravinsky, especially the notion that an artist could innovate within a set of formal parameters. In other words, according to Stravinsky, the composer, when an artist limits oneself, it's by working within those limitations that one will find freedom. Stravinsky's compositional practice actually embodied this idea in a very unique way. He was known for having repeating variations on a theme frequently throughout a single composition. And the way that he would actually do this in composing them was to write a piece of music out on carbon paper. So he'd have multiples, cut them out, and then paste them throughout a composition thereafter. So for Bridget Riley, we find that much of her work is also characterized by this sense of repetition, right? This limitation of formal concerns. And in this piece, which is actually on view in Gallery 6, it's from the museum's collection, we can see it's based around formal repetition with slight variations in color, which allows her to create these unique, stimulating optical effects. So the jazz fans among us will know probably that in 1969, Miles Davis took this idea of repetition, which creates innovation, to its logical conclusion, I think. So In a Silent Way is a prototypical fusion record. There are 2 cuts on the album. Both tracks are divided into 3 pieces, 3 movements, and the first introductory piece and the coda, the final piece, are exact duplicates. So the tape was literally cut and pasted. This was a totally innovative thing in 1969. It seemed to fly in the face of what jazz was supposed to be, right? Because jazz was supposed to be this sort of organic thing and spontaneous. But in fact, what Miles wound up doing, as he did so many times, was to create a totally new concept for what jazz could be. So Bridget Riley, in a sense, understood that. In formal terms, as she says, the common ground between music and painting seems to lie in the organization of their abstract principles. But she also recognized the function of these qualities. She said, quote, "Music articulates an indefinable content. It seems to me this also applies to abstract painting. The idea is that music and abstract art are fundamentally expressing an experience which is indefinable." In some ways, this is linking herself with the spiritual trajectory of Kandinsky. The star of our show, of course, is Oliver Lee Jackson. While working in St. Louis in the late 1960s, he became affiliated with a consortium called the Black Artists Group, or BAG, B-A-G. This was a group primarily of musicians, actually, and also performance artists, but also poets. It was not necessarily a visual arts group. It was an offshoot of that broader black arts movement that was happening in the late 60s and early 70s throughout the country. So Oliver Lee Jackson becomes close friends with one of the leaders of BAG, the saxophonist Julius Hemphill. Hemphill was an avant-garde jazz musician, a practitioner really of a style called free jazz, which is privileging improvisation over a set formal structure. So this improvisatory nature of jazz, this emphasis on subjectivity, on expressiveness, really informs Oliver Lee Jackson's work. They're important sources for him as a painter. His work, as he describes it, is not about storytelling. It's not about narrative. Instead, he explores the expressive possibilities of form to create tension, to open up possibilities for the viewer's own interpretation. So Jackson, over the years, has lent his work to various album covers, including this one, which I'm showing on the left, an album of the late 70s called Blue Boyer by Hemphill. He also painted his friend Julius Hemphill in 1973. This abstract portrait is actually in the collection of the National Gallery of Art. And over the past few years, actually in 2021, the NGA acquired several preparatory studies for this work. And when you look at those, you begin to realize that this is actually based on a figurative composition, including one figure which is supposed to be holding a baton as if it was a composer. So Jackson's work is often rooted in figuration, and then he explodes this idea to become fully abstract. This is the piece which FAAAC generously purchased for the museum. The reproduction, of course, doesn't do it any justice. It is a monotype. Basically, this is a painting on paper. It's created in a process similar to printmaking. So the artist would lay printer's ink on a metal plate, press that plate onto paper, and create a sort of one-of-a-kind impression. I would suggest that there is an improvisatory aspect to all of this. It is reminiscent of the idea of a live performance, a musical performance of sorts. One will never be certain 100% what the final product will look like, right? In that moment where the plate hits the paper, anything can kind of happen. The point is actually driven home, I think, when the artist would precisely date works like this. So this piece in our collection, if you look at it closely, I think at bottom left, is dated March 8th, 2006. Again, hammering home this idea that this moment in time, this piece of art can never be recreated. So you could see why Oliver Lee Jackson's work inspired this theme of modern rhythms. So as I mentioned, the Black Artists Group, with which Oliver Lee Jackson was affiliated, is an offshoot of the broader black arts movement, which is happening in the 60s and 70s. Again, not necessarily a visual arts movement. It was founded actually by the poet Amiri Baraka in 1965 with the Black Arts Repertory Theater in Harlem, New York. But as a response to this, artists, groups like BAG, and in Chicago, a group called Afrocobra, sprung up as corollaries to the black arts movement. And Wadsworth Jarrell was actually the head visual artist of Afrocobra, which stood for the African Commune of Bad Relevant Artists. Their idea was to give the black arts movement a sort of distinct visual identity, which it didn't really have. Visually, the work was characterized by these high-key colors you could see on the work at right. Also a strong relationship between text and image, and almost a sense of propaganda. They also did several murals in the Chicagoland area. I'm showing here a piece, not in our collection, but very representative of the Afrocobra aesthetic, this piece at right. You could see these so-called Kool-Aid colors, highly saturated. The central figure is that of an anonymous African-American man playing or holding a guitar, and behind him, you may recognize actually the four members of the Beatles. So here, Wadsworth Jarrell is very consciously making a connection between the fact that African-American art was basically co-opted and popularized often by white musicians who were the beneficiaries of their innovations. At left, I am showing actually the print that is in our show. It's in our collection. It's a piece from the 1980s, a bit different stylistically, called Jazz Giants. And this is a homage to some of the great jazz musicians of the 20th century. I'm still trying to figure out who they all are, so I look to you for your help. But I think we have Dizzy Gillespie on trumpet, Harry Carney on baritone sax, Johnny Hodges on alto sax, and Cootie Williams on trumpet. I'm trying to figure out who is the trombonist. Possibly J.J. Johnson, I'm not sure. The abstract artist Betty Blayton was active in the civil rights movement in New York. She served actually as the first secretary of the board of the Studio Museum in Harlem in 1968. We're very fortunate to have this monotype in our collection from the 1980s. It's a brilliant piece and also a brilliant title called Mid-Passage Movement, conjuring all at once this connection between the middle passage, the concept of movement, not only associated with the Atlantic slave trade, but also the movement as if in a musical sense, a movement being a musical passage, part of a broader composition. So subtly, again, pointing to the fact that musical forms, blues, jazz, and so on, were innovated by African Americans and making that connection actually to the descendants of slaves. This very point was seized in the 1960s by Amiri Baraka, who advocated for a distinction in criticism, a distinction in the reception of jazz and Western classical music. He put forth this position as early as 1963, saying that black music, quote, is strictly an American phenomenon. We have got to set up standards of judgment and aesthetic excellence that depend on our native knowledge and understanding of the underlying philosophy and local cultural reference that produce blues and jazz, in order to produce valid critical writing or commentary about it. In other words, it was important for the intellectual leaders of the Black Arts movement to fully dispense with this idea of integrating jazz into the symphonic tradition or into the Western classical canon. That was an idea that was previously sort of suggested by earlier activists in the Harlem Renaissance, but by the time of the 60s and 70s in the Black Power movement, this was sort of dispensed with, and a revised approach, basically, to topics of black art and creativity were needed. Finally, I thought I'd end with talking about Bearden, who everyone is most familiar with. Romare Bearden was very much capturing and commenting on the importance of music in African American culture. He's best known, of course, for these large-scale collages, like this one, which is at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, often showing figures playing instruments. And in Bearden's work, you'll find that musical instruments are frequently situated as attributes of daily life. This notion, I think, might have been inspired by the fact that Bearden was, at one time, an aspiring composer, an aspiring musician himself. So in the early 1950s, Bearden co-wrote a minor hit called Seabreeze. It's actually sort of a vocal-based, poppy, jazz-inflected song expressly written for the Seagram's Beverage Company. So this was picked up by Seagram's for radio advertising. The Seagram Seabreeze was really just a gin and tonic, but it's just a creative marketing, like moderately creative marketing endeavor. So basically they're trying to market their new gin, right? Bearden's song is picked up by Seagram's. It's played throughout the radio. It was actually recorded by Billy Eckstine in the 1950s, but I would recommend you listen to the version by Branford Marsalis, which is a bit more ambitious and I think perhaps of greater interest to jazz fans. That's kind of all for now. The show, Modern Rhythms, is up in Gallery 6, again, the low light gallery, so don't be surprised if the light is off. Just walk right in, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.